There is a photograph on my refrigerator that has hung there for 22 years. In it, I am holding a 3-day-old baby, and I am not smiling. People who visit assume I was tired. They assume wrong. I wasn't tired that morning. I was doing the math on the life I was about to lose, and deciding to lose it anyway. Her name is Grace. Tomorrow she graduates as valedictorian, and my sister has already bought a new dress for it. My sister did not raise her. I need you to understand that before anything else, because by the end of tomorrow, half the people in that auditorium will believe the opposite, and I let them. For 22 years, I let them. I want to tell you why I stayed quiet, and I want to tell you what finally made the silence break, because it wasn't me who broke it. My name is Eleanor Whitaker. Everyone calls me Nell, and the last thing my family expected was that I had kept every single receipt. Let me take you back to the kitchen where it started. I was 30 years old. There was a letter on the counter from a nursing program in Boston, a full scholarship, the kind that changes the shape of a person's entire future. I had opened it that morning and read it 4 times before breakfast. I had a man, too, back then. Daniel. He had already found us an apartment near the harbor. I had 1 foot out of that small town and 1 hand on a door I had been trying to open my whole life. Then the phone rang, and my mother said 4 words that closed it. Diana had the baby. I drove to the hospital thinking I was going to meet my niece. I was not prepared for what waited in that room. My father was standing by the window with his arms crossed, the way he stood when a decision had already been made without you. My mother was holding paperwork, and Diana, 19, beautiful, terrified, would not look at the bassinet at all. She looked at me instead. "You're better at this than me," she said. Not a question, an assignment. I laughed because I thought it was a joke. Nobody else laughed. That was the first time I understood that I was the only person in the room who didn't already know why I'd been called. My father spoke without turning from the window. "The girl can't raise a child. You can. It stays in the family." "That's the end of it," I said. "The baby had a mother." I said Diana would change her mind in a week. I said a dozen reasonable things, and every one of them bounced off the glass my father was staring through. And then my mother set the paperwork in my lap. Temporary guardianship, already filled out, my name already typed where a mother's name should go, and I realized the pen had been chosen before I'd walked in. "It's temporary," my mother said. I believed her. God help me, I believed her for about 6 years. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn for 2 more decades, was what my parents had actually been discussing in that hospital before I arrived. It wasn't guardianship, I'll get to that. But if you'd told me that morning what my father had already put in motion, I would not have signed. I would have run, and Grace would have grown up a stranger. So I signed, and Boston went into a drawer, and Daniel waited 3 months before he stopped waiting. Here's the part nobody in my family will admit happened. For the first year, Diana did visit. At Christmas, at Easter, in a nice coat, for exactly the length of time it takes to be photographed. She'd hold Grace for the camera, then hand her back the second the baby cried, the way you return something to a shelf. My mother narrated those visits like a hero's arc. Diana came all this way. Diana is trying so hard. It's so difficult for her. Nobody ever said it was difficult for me. I noticed that. I want you to know I noticed it every single time. And I said nothing. And the not saying anything is a muscle you can build until it's the strongest thing you own. By the time Grace was 2, the visits had thinned to phone calls. By the time she was 4, the calls came with a new sound in Diana's voice. Impatience, like I was the inconvenient reminder of a chapter she was trying to close. And by the time Grace was 6 and called me Mama in front of the whole family at Thanksgiving, my sister set down her fork, looked across the table, and said the sentence that would define the next 16 years. "See?" She took her from me. The table went quiet. My mother nodded slowly, like a truth had just been spoken aloud. My father said nothing, which from him was agreement. And a 6-year-old girl looked up at me, confused, still holding the word Mama in her mouth. That was the night the story flipped. Not because it was true, but because it was easier. A Woman Who Steals a Child is a simple story. A family that hands off a baby and then rewrites the mother who agreed to take it. That's a story people don't want to sit with at dinner. So I became the villain of my own kitchen. And I let it happen, because the only other option was to argue in front of Grace, and I would have burned every relationship in that family before I'd let that child feel like an object being fought over. I told myself, let them have the story. I'll have the girl. What I didn't count on was that a story, repeated long enough, starts to reach the girl too. Grace was 8 the first time she asked me why her real mom didn't want her. We were folding laundry. She said it the way children say the most devastating things, casually, into a towel, not looking up. And I had a choice in that half second that I have replayed 1,000 times since. I could tell her the truth, that her mother had been a frightened teenager cornered by a man who should have known better, that her grandfather had made a decision in a hospital room that didn't want her was the cruelest possible summary of a much more complicated cowardice. Or I could give her a mother worth loving. I chose the second one. Your mom loved you so much, I said, that she gave you to the person she trusted most in the whole world. That's why you're here with me. It was a lie. It was the most generous lie I have ever told, and I told it to protect a woman who was, at that very moment, at a gala 3 states away, telling a very different lie about me. Here's something I've never said out loud until now. Every year on Grace's birthday, a card would arrive. Elegant handwriting. Happy birthday, my darling. Love, Mom. A check tucked inside. Sometimes $50, once a whole $200. Grace treasured those cards. She kept them in a shoebox under her bed and read them when she was sad. Diana didn't send those cards. I did. I bought them. I wrote them in my left hand so the writing wouldn't match mine. I signed my sister's name and funded my sister's love out of a grocery budget that could not spare it, because a little girl needed to believe her mother was thinking of her, and her mother was not. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I didn't just raise Diana's daughter. Diana's love, out of nothing, for years, so that a child would have something soft to hold on the nights she cried. And I kept the receipts, every card, every canceled check in my own account, every returned envelope from the few times I tried to send them to Diana to sign herself, only to have them come back unopened. I kept them in a box in the top of my closet, and I never once imagined I'd need them. I kept them because I keep everything. That's the whole reason. It would turn out to be the most important habit of my life. Grace's teenage years were where the family's story finally reached its target. Diana had married well by then, a man named Prescott. Money, a house with a name. And a woman with a house with a name needs a redemption story. So the visits resumed, glossy now, timed for maximum effect. Diana would sweep in with gifts I couldn't afford, take Grace shopping, whisper about how she'd always wanted her back, but how it was complicated, how your Aunt Nell can be very controlling. And she had started calling herself the mother and me, the aunt, in the same breath. And Grace, at 15, was old enough to notice the math didn't work and young enough not to care, because one woman brought her joy on weekends and the other one enforced curfews. We had a fight when Grace was 16, the worst one. She screamed that Diana was her real mother and I had stolen her whole life, throwing my own family's story back at me word for word. She'd absorbed it that completely, and every cell in my body wanted to walk to the closet, take down that box, and lay 22 birthday cards on the kitchen table. I didn't, because here is the thing about the truth. Once Grace knew it, she could never unknow it. And a 16-year-old who learns her birth mother essentially discarded her, that's a wound that doesn't close. I decided I would rather be hated by a whole daughter than loved by a broken one. So I said, I know. I'm sorry you're hurting. And I closed my bedroom door, and I did the not saying anything again, and it was the hardest rep I ever pulled. There were 2 nights that came close to breaking it all open. The first, Grace was 17, doing a school project on family history, and she found a folder in the filing cabinet. The wrong folder, the one with the temporary guardianship papers. She saw my name where a mother's name goes. She saw the date. She stood in the hallway with the page shaking in her hand and asked me what it meant. My heart stopped, and I heard myself say, "That's just legal paperwork, so I could take you to the doctor. Your grandfather set it up. True enough to survive." She put it back. I didn't breathe until I heard her door close. The second, Diana herself almost did it. At Grace's 18th birthday dinner, my sister, 2 glasses of wine in, started a sentence with, "When I signed you over," and stopped so hard she nearly bit through her own words. Grace looked up. "Signed me over?" And Diana laughed it away. "Signed you up for the family trust, darling," and changed the subject and shot me a look across the table that was pure panic. Because for 1 second, my sister had remembered which of us was actually telling the truth, and she had seen, in my face, that I would never be the one to use it. That look is important. Remember it, because Diana walked away from that dinner believing something dangerous, that my silence was permanent, that she could say anything, do anything, stage anything, and I would swallow it to protect Grace. She was right about the first part. She was very, very wrong about who would break the silence. Because 3 weeks before graduation, Grace, packing for college, cleaning out my closet to help, found the box. I didn't know she'd found it. That's what I need you to sit with. For 3 weeks, I had no idea. Grace said nothing. She went to school. She wrote her valedictorian speech. She smiled at Diana's fittings and nodded at my curfews and carried the entire weight of 22 years of my life alone. And I did not see it in her face, because I had taught her too well how to do the not saying anything. She had learned it from me, my own silence, handed down like an heirloom. And she was about to spend it all in 1 night. Diana called me the morning of the graduation. She was warm in the way she got when she wanted something, and had decided you couldn't refuse it. "I have a little surprise planned," she said. "For Grace, a moment, you'll love it." I did not love it. I had learned to fear the word moment in my sister's mouth. What I didn't know, what I'd learned from the reporter's own business card an hour later, was that Diana had arranged for a lifestyle magazine to cover the graduation. The Mother Who Came Back, the piece was going to be called. A soft-focus redemption story. The glamorous woman who'd made hard choices, reunited at last with the brilliant daughter she'd never stopped fighting for. There was a photographer. There was a plan for Diana to walk on stage after the valedictorian speech, embrace Grace at the podium, and speak, reclaiming her, publicly, in front of 800 people and a camera, cementing the story forever. And the story required a villain to have been overcome. That was me. The controlling aunt, gently, lovingly edged out of the frame. I found all this out because the reporter, kind and clueless, approached me in the parking lot, assuming I was thrilled. "You must be so proud of Diana," she said, finally getting her daughter back. And she showed me the working headline on her phone, and the ground tilted under me, and I understood that in 90 minutes my sister was going to stand up and turn 22 years of my life into a footnote in her comeback. I want to tell you I had a brilliant plan. I didn't. I stood in that parking lot and I did what I always did. I decided to swallow it. Let them have the story. I'll have the girl. Grace is leaving for college in August. It doesn't matter what a magazine prints. She knows I love her. That's enough. I walked into that auditorium, fully intending to sit in the 3rd row, and let my sister take everything, one last time. Then Grace walked to the podium. She was luminous. She thanked her teachers. She made the crowd laugh. And then she said, "Before I finish, I need to talk about my mother." I saw Diana, 2 seats down, straighten and smooth her dress. I saw the photographer lift the camera. My sister actually began to rise, and Grace said, "Her name is Nell. The auditorium didn't react at first. They didn't have the context. But I did, and Diana did. I watched her freeze halfway out of her seat, suspended, as her daughter kept talking. For 22 years, Grace said, a woman gave up a scholarship, gave up the man she loved, and gave up any life of her own to raise a baby that was handed to her in a hospital room when she was 30 years old. She was told it was temporary. It was never temporary. She knew that, and she stayed anyway. My hands were shaking. I remember thinking, "Stop, sweetheart. Don't do this to yourself in front of everyone." 3 weeks ago, Grace said, I found a box in her closet. I wasn't snooping. I was cleaning, because that's what she taught me. You leave a place better than you found it. A few people laughed, softly, uncertain. In that box were 22 birthday cards, signed by my mother. Except they weren't from my mother. They were written in my Aunt Nell's left hand, paid for out of her own account, because she wanted me to grow up believing someone out there loved me, even when they didn't. She spent 22 years protecting the reputation of the person who left me. She never once told me the truth, because she was afraid it would hurt me more than the lie. You could hear the room breathing now, and Diana was fully standing, and the story on her face was collapsing in real time, because she suddenly understood that the box existed, and that it was evidence, and that her daughter had it, and that there was nothing she could say in a public auditorium that the receipts could not immediately contradict. That was the revenge. I want to be precise about it, because it matters. I did not stand up and expose my sister. I never would have. The exposure came entirely from the truth Diana herself had created, her own forged love, in my handwriting, in a box, turned around in the one place she had chosen for her triumph. She had built the stage. She had hired the camera. She had gathered the audience whose opinion she cared about most, and her own daughter used every piece of it to say the one thing Diana could not survive being said. You were never here, and someone else was. But Grace wasn't done, and this is the part I didn't see coming. The part that broke my prediction, not just Diana's. The first need to say one more thing, Grace said, because it isn't only my aunt's story. She looked, not at Diana, but at the front row, at my father, old now, in his wheelchair, the man who had stood at that hospital window 22 years before. My grandfather made a decision when I was 3 days old, Grace said, and then he made my aunt promise never to tell me the truth. She kept a promise to a man who didn't deserve it for 2 decades because she'd given her word. That's who raised me. That's who I am trying to be. And my father, my hard, silent, immovable father, did something I had never once seen him do in 52 years. He raised his hand. He asked, in a thin voice, for the microphone. The room waited. My heart was somewhere around my knees. "She's telling the truth," my father said. "All of it. I forbade my daughter Nell from ever telling this child what really happened. I told her I'd cut her off from this family if she did. She chose the family's silence over her own name for 22 years. His voice cracked on the last part. I was wrong. I was wrong for all of it, and I am too old and too much of a coward to have said so until my granddaughter said it for me. That was the twist I never saw. I had spent 22 years believing that if the truth ever came out, I would be the one to pay for it, that Grace would love me less, that the family would fracture, that I'd be left holding the wreckage. I never once imagined that the truth, when it finally came, would arrive as an apology, that the people who'd built the lie would be the ones to dismantle it in public. And Diana? Diana sat back down, slowly. The photographer had lowered the camera. There was no redemption story here anymore, only a woman being seen, at last, exactly as she was. She did not cry the pretty way she cried at galas. She put her face in her hands, and for the first time in 22 years, my sister looked like the terrified 19-year-old from the hospital room, and I felt something I did not expect to feel. I felt sorry for her. The reveal had answered every question. Why I stayed silent, a promise, and a child's heart I was protecting. Why I gave up Boston because a baby in a bassinet had no one else. Why the sacrifice was bigger than anyone knew, because I hadn't only raised Grace, I'd spent 2 decades feeding her a mother who wasn't there, at my own expense, and taken the blame for it, and it had all come out without me saying a single word. Grace finished her speech. "I'm going to college in the fall to study nursing," she said. "At the program in Boston my mother turned down to keep me. I'm going in her name. Thank you, Mom." And she looked straight at me in the 3rd row. 800 people turned to look at the woman the story had spent 22 years erasing. And for the first time in my life, I did not do the not saying anything. I stood up in front of all of them, and I let myself be her mother out loud. Revenge, on its own, is a cold meal. I know that now. Standing in that auditorium, with 800 faces turned toward me, vindicated at last, I felt the strangest thing. It wasn't enough. Being proven right is not the same as being at peace. That comes later, and it comes harder, and it doesn't come from the wrongdoer suffering. Diana found me in the parking lot after. No camera now, no coat worth photographing, just my sister, mascara ruined, holding the reporter's business card, which she had torn in half. "I killed the story," she said. "There's no story. I didn't say anything. Old habit." "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to let me get through it." And then my sister told me the truth she had been running from for 22 years. About the professor, about the threats, about being 19 and certain her life was over, about telling herself that giving Grace to me was the loving choice, when really it was the frightened one, and about how, once she'd built a new life, it was easier to be the tragic mother kept from her child than to be the woman who'd left. "Every year I got your cards to Grace," she said. "The ones you signed my name to. I knew it was you. I let you do it. I let you love her for me, and I resented you for being better at it. That's the worst thing I've ever done, and I did it slowly, over 22 years, so I'd never have to notice I was doing it. An apology would have been easy. Diana had always been good at apologies. They cost her nothing. So I waited to see if there would be more than words. There was. Here's what my sister actually did over the months that followed, because this is the part that matters, the part that turned a sorry into something real. She sold the Prescott name's most valuable thing, her image. She gave the magazine a very different interview than the one she'd planned, an honest one, with her own name on the failures. She set up a fund in my store's name, not hers, that paid off the mortgage on the small house where I'd raised her daughter. And when our father's health finally collapsed that winter, it was Diana who moved back to care for him. The hard, unglamorous, unphotographable work of it, so that I, for the first time in 22 years, did not have to be the one who carried the family. "You've done your turn," she told me. "It's mine now." That's how I knew it was real. Not the tears in the parking lot, the bedpans in December. Redemption you can photograph isn't redemption. Redemption is the cost you pay when no one's watching. My father died in March. Before he did, he asked for me. He couldn't say much by then. He held my hand and said, "You were the best of us. I'm sorry I only knew it too late." I forgave him, not because he'd earned it, because carrying it any further would have cost me more than putting it down. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a gift you give the other person. It's the moment you stop paying rent on a room you don't want to live in anymore. Grace went to Boston in the fall. To the program I'd turned down. She calls me every Sunday. She calls Diana too, now, a different relationship. Careful, honest, built on truth instead of birthday cards. That's the version that lasts. The one built on a lie was always going to break. It just took 22 years and a graduation to break it clean. The photograph is still on my refrigerator. Me, 30 years old, holding a 3-day-old baby, not smiling. But I look at it differently now. I used to see the life I lost in that picture. Now I see the life I chose. They were the same decision. I just needed 22 years to understand that losing everything and choosing everything can happen in the exact same moment, in a hospital room, with a pen someone else picked out for you. People ask me if I'm angry about the years I lost, the scholarship, Daniel. the life near the harbor I never got to live. And I tell them the truth, the one I finally get to say out loud. I didn't lose those years. I spent them. There's a difference. You lose something by accident. You spend it on purpose, on something you decided was worth it. Her name is Grace, and she was worth all of it. If you've ever been the one who did all the loving and got none of the credit, the one who held the family together while someone else got the applause, comment "I stayed anyway" below. And if you believe that the quiet ones, the ones who keep their word when it costs them everything, deserve to be seen at least once before it's too late, hit subscribe, because next week's story might just be your story.